Of members present. We're having a joint committee meeting tonight for Finance and Economic Development. So at this time, I will call the finance portion of this joint meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, September 10th, 2019.
Thank you. Yes, and I will call this joint meeting of Finance and the Economic Development Committee to order. Record will show that 4 members of the committee are in attendance.
Okay. With that, tonight, the sole purpose for our joint meeting is to consider one item. And and I would say with, at quite a rapid pace, an opportunity has presented itself locally. I think you're aware that Rialto Capital has put the Wausau Center Mall up for sale. And as such, a local investment group has decided to put an effort together to try to compete in that arena and potentially secure Wausau Center under a measure of local control for the purpose of repurposing and perhaps revitalizing the center. So with that, the one item on our agenda tonight is consideration and possible action regarding the city's participation in acquisition by Wausau Opportunity Zone Fund, LLC, of the Wausau Center Mall. With that, we have a couple of presenters with us tonight that have a presentation. I think before we get to the presentation, Mr. Mayor, did you want to offer comments before or after?
I can offer it after.
Okay, all right, so we'll hold the mayor's comments. Mr. Mella, did you want to begin the presentation this evening, or? Okay.
It's up to you.
Come on forward. We'd like to hear from Wausau Opportunity Zone Fund, LLC, about the proposal that's been coming together, and I know that you've put a lot of hours into this in a couple weeks, and so I'm glad that we were able to get together tonight in a special meeting setting and accommodate the group's timeline. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation to you this evening. And it has been quite a whirlwind over the past several weeks. Just a couple of points of clarification so that we understand what's going on. I'm here to speak on behalf of 2 of the local foundations, the Judith Alexander Foundation and the Dwight and Linda Davis Foundation. These are 2 of the organizations that are primarily providing support for this effort. These foundations were established with the primary focus and goal of adding to the area's quality of life and economic vitality. They are not for-profit organizations. These are organizations that essentially deploy their funds for purposes of making Wausau a better place to live. Some of these things that they have worked on in the past that you may be familiar with and they were instrumental in helping fund included things like the Woodson YMCA Foundation, expansion, which is going on right now. The River Life project, which is currently in its development stages. The 400 block, which is one of the icons of downtown Wausau. The Arts Block and the Grand Theater, another icon in downtown Wausau. The Wausau area, they've contributed to the Wausau Whitewater Course and the expansion and renovations to the Wausau Whitewater Course. They've worked with the Boys and Girls Club, English as a second language programs in the school districts, North Central Technical College, and many others. These are organizations whose goal it is to try to facilitate the economic development and the well-being of everyone in the city of Wausau. So, essentially, the foundations are here as a friend of Wausau in an attempt to try to help the community and help the city obtain local control over the Wausau Center Mall. So the next question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the challenge that we face today? Well, the challenge we face today is the Wausau Center Mall is actually for sale. For a number of years, we have stood by and watched as that facility was run, and it became not necessarily an eyesore, but we knew that it was struggling, and suddenly it lost all of its anchor tenants, and it was becoming more and more of a challenge and a concern about what was going to happen with that facility. But there was nothing we could do about it, because the property was owned in essentially a specialized receivership, and the people who were in charge of that had apparently no interest in working with the city and helping the city try to redevelop anything that occurred there. So different options were presented, different things were tried, nothing ever worked, and it continued to degrade over time. As it stands currently, the Wausau Center Mall, the mall portion of the mall, is at less than 50% occupancy. And according to the information that was made available to us by the broker who's got it listed for sale, the property's currently losing money. So the challenge we face is, great, the Wausau Center Mall is for sale, but then no one's going to buy it because it's not making any money. So what are we going to do about that? So two options present themselves in circumstances like this. There's the option of local control, and unfortunately we don't have anybody who's interested in doing a for-profit venture to acquire the mall. In the limited period of time we've had since we found out that the mall was for sale, we've looked around and asked, and inquiries are made, and there is no one who's going to come forward to buy the mall locally who's interested in doing this on a for-profit basis. The other alternative is that one of a small number of out-of-state investors would potentially buy the mall. Now, I can tell you all the doom and gloom stories about that, about what that could potentially mean, but I actually have an expert here who can tell me a little bit about what can potentially happen if one of these outside investors were to acquire the mall. His name is Andy Weiner, and you may know Andy because he works with a company called Rockstep Capital. He's the founder and managing partner for that business. And you've actually worked with Andy a couple times in the past when you thought there might be opportunities to redevelop the mall, which never came to fruition. We have asked Andy to assist us in a consulting basis as we continue to work forward or work toward the potential acquisition of the mall. But I'd like Andy to come up and just briefly describe to you what the possibilities would be and what the risks we face are in the event that we had an out-of-state buyer acquire the mall. So Andy, can I have you come up here, please?
Hello, everybody. I know
Hi.
I've met.
Welcome.
Yeah, I've met a number of you, and just a little background. We're based out of Houston. We are a shopping center investment company with a specialty in markets like Wausau and product like Wausau. We like Wausau Center. So we own and manage malls all around the country. We're very active in this sector. And what's happening is that there is a group of investors out there that are buying by far the majority of these properties when they go bankrupt. And we are very familiar with these groups. They're very financially successful, and they were bidding on this asset. And they are out of state. They are what I call an asset depletion strategy. They basically cut costs, do not reinvest in the property. They get their capital out as quickly as they can and just hang on. And it's a very unpleasant for communities when these type of buyers take control of a property. And the broker on this property, the broker out of New York who sells these things, called me and said, look, Andy, just heads up, this is moving towards asset depletion, and I know that there are some local groups out there. You might want to see if there's a way to get local groups coordinated. And that's how this process occurred. And what Joe and the foundations have put together is really very unique. I don't see this around the country. It's the ability for local folks to get control of this and direct the future and not have misery, very frankly. It is not a pleasant process if the asset depletion players get control of this property. So, do you want me to add anything, Joe? Or? Great. Thank you, guys.
Andy,
Yeah.
maybe you could speak to just another tactic that this sort of enterprise engages in, and that is maybe filing suit against the municipality for what they would say is overtaxation, and that becomes a
I'll be
litigious
more
issue.
specific. They will often not pay bills. They will often fight. There will be lawsuits back and forth. And then after 3 to 5 to 7 years, maybe they just won't pay taxes. You end up taking the property back, and you end up in a very, I call it misery. It really is. And I see this happening around the country, in communities around the country. And they wish they would have had the ability to have local groups who care about the community and want to see the asset stabilize and become something that really has long-term stability. That's the opportunity here.
Thank you very much, Andy. So what have we tried to pull together here in the brief period of time we've had available to us to attempt to get involved in this process? As Andy mentioned, when we learned that the property was for sale and there was the possibility of being able to acquire the facility, we took a look at what we could pull together financially, and with the foundation's support, we were able to figure out a number of steps to get us close to the finish line to be able to acquire the property. But we also require the city's assistance in this process. And not only initially for the acquisition piece, but also for ongoing operations while we analyze the existing options that have been presented and that may be available to us, and look at the possibility and the future planning for that facility. So a term sheet has been provided to you. It's my understanding that we've been working on that with city staff for the past week and a half to try to outline what the joint venture would essentially be between the city of Wausau and these foundations to try and obtain local control and manage that property for a period of time until we're able to repurpose it in a way that's going to be beneficial for the entire community. So hopefully you've all had a chance to see that. I guess the last thing I wanted to just touch base on then with you is where we are in the process. As it stands today, in anticipation of having the city's participation in this joint venture, in the way we outlined in that term sheet, we went ahead and made a bid to acquire them all. We had to bid more money than the asset depletion guys did because our bid, due to the fact that it was a joint venture with the municipality, is viewed as a riskier choice. The asset depletion guys were ready to close in 15 days and pay all cash, and we'd never hear from them again until they show up and start suing you to get their taxes reduced. In our case, we needed more time because we needed to work on some of the, what we call the due diligence, analyzing, understanding what the asset looks like, and also working on an arrangement with the city of Wausau. And that made us more risky, so we had to actually offer more money than the other folks did. Our bid was accepted, but our bid is contingent on working on an arrangement with the city in the way we've outlined for you. So if we don't get that worked out, we're going to be looking back to the asset depletion guys, stepping back in and potentially buying the property from the city. So if you're asking yourself, we've got something in front of us where we're being asked to vote yes or no. If you're asking yourself what happens if we vote yes, the answer to that is over the next several months, we will be taking on the responsibility, along with the city, of being real estate redevelopers with the Wausau Center Mall. We are going to have the opportunity to examine all of the various options that have been presented. And trust me, there are a lot of different options. There's been lots of different things that have been developed over the recent past about what can be done with that property. There's a couple of different studies that are on the city's website right now that you can look at, that you've hired folks to give you different ideas about what you can do. So you've got options from that side to, it runs the gamut. It's office, it's housing, it's entertainment, it's retail, it's open streets. There's all kinds of different options that are out there. Now, some of these options may be economically viable and some of them may not be. We're not sure. We want some time to try to work through all that and figure out what's going to be the best plan that we can come up with in a reasonable period of time, so that we have something that we can all be proud of when we're finished, when this project is done. And we also need a little bit of time to make sure that we've examined all the potential options that haven't even been presented to us yet. One of the things that I think that Andy would even say to us is, once you have local control over an asset, it kind of unlocks the opportunities and the options that are there, because folks that might not have otherwise thought about potentially using that property for development say, hey, you know what? There's a local folks there who are interested in seeing this be successful. That's somebody that I can go and talk to. And we're more than willing to talk to anybody at this point in time about what potential options there are out there with that facility. The other option is you vote no. If you vote no on that proposed plan that's in front of you, we're not going any further forward with the project. And we're really hoping for unanimous or near unanimous support from the city on this project. If you vote no, my guess is that the broker that Andy mentioned, his name is Tom Dabrowski, is going to get a phone call. He's going to find out that we're not moving forward any longer. He's going to pull the plug. We're not going to invest any more money in this. We're not going to spend any more time on it. And Andy's going to turn around and he's going to go back to one of those asset depletion guys who's still waiting out there to potentially buy this asset. And they're going to be the folks you're going to be dealing with. So personally, that's something that I hope you don't do, because I think we have an opportunity here. You have an opportunity as representatives of the city of Wausau to do something that we can be proud of for the next generation. Opportunities like this don't come around very often. You have a chance right now to make a difference for the community, for downtown, and for the whole region, frankly. I think you'll see that in the limited period of time we've had. We've actually gone out and talked to some of the other business owners and employers and other folks in the community, and when we tell them what's going on, they all voice support for it. I'm hoping that you've also received the petition that got signed and submitted with respect to the various companies in the area that have looked at what we're proposing to do here and have offered support for that as well. And there are folks in our audience here this evening who've shown up just because they want to demonstrate their support for this. So again, we are asking for your support with this, and with that, I will ask if there are any questions.
Joe, so does the group envision sort of a phased approach where, phase one would be sort of right the ship, kind of get a hold of things, level it off, and then, look for what phase two or phase three might be. But right away, it's kind of like get a firm hand on it.
Well, from what we have discussed to this point, there's going to be kind of a parallel track. One of those tracks is going to be trying to stabilize the mall portion of the mall. So that's the small shops that are in the interior portion. At the same time, we don't think we have time to wait until that part gets done. We think we also have to be visioning at the same time, because as these opportunities present themselves, we don't want to be still stuck saying, we're spending all of our time and we've got Rockstep working on just trying to renegotiate the existing leases that are in the facility. We want to make sure that we have the ability to respond to ideas and options and things that are going to be presented to us that we're anticipating they're going to be happening very shortly.
Okay. With that also, as part of your presentation, do you have any representatives either from the Wausau organization or from within the foundations that would also like to address the committee this evening?
If you would like. We have both executive directors here from both foundations.
It would be terrific if you could come up, just state your name and address. Thank you.
I'm Gary Friels with the Judd S. Alexander Foundation. I work in Wausau and live in the town of Knowlton. And I think a lot of you know me, many of you don't. We've had a very long history of working together. I think the first time we ever entered into a loan relationship with the city was back for the Jefferson ramp, and that was in probably worse condition than the mall. And, we've had a lot of projects like that, and I think so many things have worked out successfully. And the only thing I can tell you is we're not in it for a return. We're here to see the city be successful. And that's all we're here for. What we're putting in, we're not looking to get back. We'll probably put more in, which we're not looking to get back. But we think that, the community is a better place to live if the mall is a site that we're, again, proud of, like we were back in, the early 80s when it was built. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Gary. I'm Jeff Stubbe, and I'm the Executive Director of the Dwight and Linda Davis Foundation. We're kind of the new kid on the block. The foundation is not that old, but pretty substantial, and we've been pretty active in the last few years in the community. Dwight has had a major role in downtown development throughout his career, and now doing that through philanthropy. As Gary said, and I'll reinforce that, we're not doing this to figure out how to make money on it. That will be in the hands of the developers. What we really have as a goal is to make sure that we enhance the community and downtown. We only have one downtown. The community is larger than Wausau itself, but there is only one downtown, and it's really the lifeblood of a community, and so many nice things have happened. And I know I think Dwight tells a story about back when the mall was initially built, and, the whole project was put together. He was involved back then, and he talked about a barbell. And he said there was the south end of downtown and the north end of downtown. You had to get both solved. And they got the south end solved, and for years been working on the north end. Well, here we are in the opposite. The Y project's going, and we got the south end, the north end going, and the south end is a problem. But what an opportunity with the mall going up for sale if we can keep it local and build that barbell a little quicker than what it took, last time. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. I also noticed during the discussion that the director of the Area Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Ekman, is in the audience. He looks like he's got copies of that petition, if you'd want to bring those up and distribute them. And if you have comments to offer, Dave, that would be welcome.
Thank you, Chair Rasmussen, Chair Neal. I'm going to walk up to the clerk and present these to her.
Just kind of describe what they entail.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Dave Ekman. I'm the president, CEO of the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce. We're at 200 Washington Street, Wausau, Wisconsin. Would like to take the opportunity, now you've presented a letter, and I'm going to read through the letter briefly and abbreviated, but what you'll find behind that letter is a stack of endorsements from business leaders throughout the Greater Wausau region. Business leaders that understand the economic development, the importance in the city of Wausau as being the major financial center and successful for our future, today and the future. So I'm here to advocate for the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce and community leaders' strong desire to see the city of Wausau strongly support the efforts of the local group of philanthropic organizations. For over a decade, city leaders and community leaders have grappled with absent, out-of-town ownership and made strong efforts to reposition the six-city block parcel for future use. City officials and community stakeholders understand the mall's strategic economic importance. In fact, TIP Strategies, a national economic development planning firm that recently completed the Greater Wausau Economic Development Plan in March of this year, called for, I quote, "Commission of a master plan that explores a range of long-term viable options for redeveloping the Wausau Center Mall, which includes incorporating a range of public sector investment strategies, foundations, interests, and private sector into planning for redevelopment. Today, together, we have the opportunity to create a new approach for the Wausau Center Mall." The efforts to complete this purchase are going to really require a strong public-private partnership sustained, not only today moving forward, but for some time to come. In submitting this letter, the leaders of the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce, along with business and community leaders, are conveying to you and the members of the Wausau City Council a strong sense of urgency to participate and help to reposition the Wausau Center Mall. While the local foundations have made a substantial financial commitment to purchase the Wausau Center Mall, completing the transaction will require the City of Wausau city government to partner in financial and real estate considerations, which in the end will secure local ownership. From the perspective of the chamber and the business signers on this letter, it is believed that an enhanced and updated plan for the mall will offer our community numerous benefits. In addition, it would display at the Wausau public and private stakeholders are willing to work together to improve the quality of life for their citizens. Along with recent collaboration of the YMCA and Aspirus Clinic campus, this investment will further our strong collaborative reputation that welcomes business in the future. Furthermore, the development of this property will transition it from an underperforming asset to a tax-based strengthener. Finally, we feel that this plan, done well, will enhance the community's ability to retain and attract quality employees and their families to the Wausau area. We strongly urge you, council members, to consider this proposal as a very positive step for our community. I just want to set this aside because as I was coming down from my office, walking down from the mall, down here, 3rd Street, I stopped in. In fact, I talked to Blake from River District today at a meeting when we're talking about the towers and we're talking about the South Riverfront and how pivotal this piece of real estate is to connecting towers to the riverfront. It's a piece of the puzzle. It's a very important piece of the puzzle. But I asked Blake, I said, how does this impact the merchants on 3rd? And he said, big time. This is a very positive development for the merchants on Third. A lot of investment, a lot of business investment going on in that corridor. It's our main street. And Blake said, they can measure a lower sales revenue based on the decomposition of what's happening at the mall. I also stopped in and I talked to Jim Daly. Now, if you know Jim Daly has put blood, sweat, and tears into what he's got in an establishment there. And I asked Jim, how important is this to you? And he said, it absolutely is important. The fact that we finally have an opportunity to build a local ownership group in collaboration with the city to reposition this property for the future is completely necessary for that Third Street. What we don't need is a metastasizing tumor on the end that makes its way down Third Street. I just wanted to share those stories with you because there are life stories down that corridor and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in their businesses. Thank you.
With that, we've got a couple other stakeholders who've indicated they'd like to comment as well. Mr. Craig, first from Compass Properties, you had indicated you wanted to speak.
Thank you very much. I just have a couple brief comments that it's such a rare opportunity that this city has, that these foundations are willing to step forward at a moment that nobody really anticipated would occur. I received a phone call in early July from Jack Cunningham from Rialto out of Miami to let me know that the property is going to become for sale, and was there a group locally interested in buying the center. And so through several discussions, Gary and Jeff and their foundations, along with Joe Mella's help and Andy Wiener's guidance, have really brought together something very quickly to take advantage of an opportunity that we probably will not get again. So I hope that the council supports it, I hope the committee support it, and the community supports it, because we won't get this chance in the near future. I came to Wausau in '96 to manage the center, and I'm very hopeful that we're going to see some really positive steps coming forward quickly. Compass is not involved at this stage. Down the road we may be, but there's a lot to sort out between now and then, and I really encourage you to vote yes. Having a unanimous vote tonight would send a real message to this community how important these foundations are to our quality of life. So I would encourage you to do so, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. From where I sit, Wausau today wouldn't be anything like it is today, given that we haven't, we've had if we had not had over a century of entrepreneurship and leadership from the private sector working with the city to do really important things and to keep this city growing and keep it alive. So I'm really happy to see the energy coming out of people that have partnered with us for decades, and I'm just glad to see it.
Okay.
Ms. Ryan has her hand up.
Yep. And then after that, I believe we'll hear then from Mr. Torco. I think he had his hand up as well.
Okay.
Deb Ryan, 702 Elm Street. For me, I've heard good things about Mr. Davis. I've heard about the Alexander Foundation since I moved here in '98, and their funding for ESL and in helping those months. So I'm very well aware of it, but to me is, why didn't they approach the city? Why isn't McDevco doing this? And not-for-profits that are coming together normally have unrelated business tax, which this seems this venture is. So is it going to be, the city should be projecting on all your TIFs, what are you expecting in the next 50 years? What if you're losing 50 years on the mall of no real estate taxes or leases? And the city should be getting an appraised value because we, the people, are the shareholders. In my opinion, the end towards the J.C. Center could easily be a conference center as well as with the parking underneath. And the city owns the land lease as well as the air rights, so there should be some consideration in what do you want to look at. Should it be subsidized housing? Should it be a conference center? What is the impact? and how high the city has a fire ladder, but if you're talking about 30 stories, is that reasonable or not? And the city should also be focusing on plans where their previous plans for these blocks did not look at the disabled, visually hearing impaired, and people that are walking or handicapped walking around in the area. And what about a downtown college or university? I recently have been reading online about the recent Netflix movie called American Factory, which has been highlighting Ohio plant that GM left, and that it's been taken over by, I believe, a Chinese company and being successful. The mall is situated with parking right there. It is easily could be converted to manufacturing or other purposes. But saying you're going to forgive a loan, that means all of us are paying in. And that's not happening on the personal income taxes of real estate for individuals and seniors. So this group is saying they don't plan on getting their money back. I don't agree. The city should plan on getting their money back, and that there's a lot more analysis that needs to be done, and it isn't. And it's up to the city to be doing this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Torco, did you have your hand up? Come on up.
My name's Dave Torco. I'm an interested citizen, live at 609 McIndoe Street in the city of Wausau. I'll give you a little historic perspective. I served as the chairman of the redevelopment authority of the city of Wausau when the Wausau Center Mall was built, and I think probably starting in 1981 or 1980. But historic perspective, when the mall was developed, the fourth anchor to the mall was the downtown. And even though it's struggling now, it truly created a success for the downtown beyond 3rd Street. If you look at 1st Street, 2nd Street, obviously 3rd Street, 4th Street, 5th Street, many good things have happened because the Wausau Center Mall was in existence and brought in a lot of business. The other part, and the representatives from the foundation, I think, are being very humble when they talk about what they do for this community. And I always maintain that this community can do things bigger and better than a community our size because of the tremendous assets of the area foundations. And they're 2 of probably 7 or 8, I'm not even sure. But the Alexander Foundation, as an example, back in 1982, helped save the project, the Wausau Center Mall, by donating an anonymous donation, which is a long time ago, so it's not so anonymous now, donated $75,000 to settle a potential lawsuit that could have stopped the project. Dwight Davis, at that time, was the president of North Central Technical College, went on to become a very successful entrepreneur, and now is giving back. Was very involved in the Wausau Center Mall project, but in the background. So that legacy is coming back to us, and I really commend these organizations. And the one question I guess I would have, in that it's a nonprofit entity, that doesn't mean it's not taxable, or does it mean it's not taxable? Real estate, it is non-taxable. Okay. So that's my comments, and I really encourage you to look positively on this vote.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's important, we are agendized for closed session to deliberate on this as 2 committees. Yeah, I think it's important that, for the public view, that we articulate the ask. I know the committee packets have been distributed and placed online, but essentially, to sum up the core pillars of the ask, as we received it, is approximately $1 million forgivable loan to be forgiven incrementally as portions of Wausau Center are either transferred to development interests or redeveloped or repurposed. There's also interest in securing Sears. There's interest also in some operational relief in terms of ground lease and parking fees. And so I think all of those things together bring us the culmination of the ask that we have. And, the first question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we have this $1 million? And in conference with Mary Ann in preparation for this meeting, she's prepared some calculations. And, she is also aware of the history. You'll recall a number of years ago, the city of Wausau and its capital projects and debt issue borrowed nearly $4 million to help the Wausau Center Mall under CVL's ownership relocate Yonkers to the penny space. And that said, that plan did not materialize. It was stopped by Mayor Milky immediately after his election. He did not support the plan. CBL was unwilling to sign, and knowing the nature of the retail stocks involved, he pulled the plug on that deal, and it did not go forward. That said, then, I believe that the Finance Committee and prior council repurposed some of those funds and diverted some of them to an extension of Fulton Street along River, in the River Life area. Separate from that, however, it's been our goal at some point to partner in the redevelopment and the repositioning of Wausau Center since that time. And we've been waiting for a long time for Rialto or somebody to come along with a plan where we could partner on a reasonable proposal that makes sense. Since then, the offering price at the mall has come down. I mean, you know, if someone had told me 15 years ago that somebody would be acquiring Wausau Center Mall for about $3 million, I'd have been stunned. And, but being the product of the decline of retail and a number of other factors that have plagued malls nationwide, it's no surprise today. But before we go to closed session, I'd like Mary Ann to just walk us through some of the calculations that she's done, because she has figured out that much of this money already exists in our system here.
Yes, so right now, of course, this is considered an economic development project, so the first thing that we, as I indicated earlier today, the only tool we have in our toolbox is our tax increment districts. We actually have 3 districts located in the central business district area. TID 8 is located on the west side of the city. TID 3 is located directly downtown and then wanders up the riverfront north. And then we recently created tax increment district number 12, which overlays a large portion of TID 3. None of those districts actually incorporate the mall in their territory boundary. So the closest one is TID 12, which has Sears and Penny's, but none of them actually have the mall within their boundaries. So I guess I was challenged with, as Lisa said, first of all, trying to figure out how the city would not only garner $1 million in cash for the loan, but then also to have it be eligible for tax increment financing. And of course, with the goal not to incur more debt for the city. So looking at each one of those districts and what their financial capacity is today, of course, tax increment district number 8 and tax increment district number 3 have been around for a while and are generating increment. TID 12 actually is not generating increment today, so it has very limited financial capacity currently. TID 3, if we were going to use that because the mall itself is not in the district, we would have had to amend the district to allow either to add it to the district or to allow expenditures within the half-mile boundary. But looking at tax increment district number 8, which is our west side district, the half-mile boundary encompasses the entire block of the mall. So it would fall within that half-mile boundary. And going back to the original project plan, we had included provisions for developer incentives within the half-mile boundary. So it would qualify as an eligible TID expense today if it was allocated to tax increment district number 8. Then, in trying to determine how we would come up with the cash for the $1 million loan, as Lisa said, in 2016, the end of 2016, the city issued 2016C, which is just shy of $4.7 million. That was a taxable issue, which is good in this situation because we can use it for private activity use without getting in trouble with the IRS. And the notice to the electorate said that we were going to use it for tax increment district number 3 and tax increment district number 8. And so today, most of that money, except for about $500,000 of it, was sitting in tax increment district number 3. Some of it had been used to fund the River Life project. About just shy of 600,000 of it was allocated to TID 8 for the Second Avenue project. But we have just shy of $1 million that has been not allocated or not spent at this point. It was set aside for the Fulton Street project. We have had a change in the financials of the Fulton project for a couple of reasons. One, the project size has decreased because we're not putting in as many roadways as we had initially envisioned. And two, we were successful in getting a $250,000 grant from the WEDC. So we won't need all of the funds that we thought we were going to need for the Fulton Street project. Now that the drawings on Fulton Street are still being worked on by heirs, and so we don't have a final budget on it, but I do think that we are very close in having all of our money that we would need for that project. And so my proposal would be that we take that taxable debt issue that has nearly $1 million that's sitting in TID 3, and we would reallocate that to TID 8. As I said, that was in our notice to the electorate that we could use it in TID 8, and that would give us the $1 million that we would use for the loan. I did review these recommendations with our bond counsel, as well as some other possibilities. This one, while it may not be perfect, certainly is the most financial viable for the city, and it's something that we can do quickly. If we wanted to, as I pointed out, go to tax increment district number 3, for example, and use that district, we would have to amend our project plan, which is going to take time. And so this is something where the $1 million is available and the project plan is in place. So I passed out a handout of what the financial impact will be to the district. And of course, Dennis and I were talking about this earlier at the finance meeting. So this, again, is not a perfect situation, but it is, I think, financially feasible. So if you recall, this past year, we did a project plan amendment for TID 8 to allow that district to help fund the First Avenue project. And so it did take on additional expenses. Looking at the financial projections through the life of the district, which is not 50 years, but 20-plus years, it shows that with that First Avenue project, it would cash flow at the end of its life. And then and it was going to have a small accumulated deficit of about $200,000 for about a 5-year period of time. If we add the $1 million plus interest for this mall loan, of course, it will increase its deficit for that period of time. So it would encounter increasing deficits up to about $1.3 million, and then that would start to decline. So it still cash flows by 2032, and I guess it would be my recommendation, since First Avenue is being shared with tax increment district number 6, which again is another concern of Dennis's, but cash flows currently, that we could look to see if TID 6 could take on more burden of First Avenue, and that would help with these deficits. Again, the district cash flow does not envision a lot of growth. You can see that we're using a flat tax increment, so we're not anticipating any growth in the district, but for some projects that are underway today. So that's
So that
what
said,
we
then
got.
any future growth that's not contemplated would then reduce these numbers because you'd have increment coming in?
Correct.
Is that, okay.
And then, as far as our commitment for the tax reimbursement in future years, I guess I would suggest that we list 3, 8, and 12 as possible financing sources. We are working on tax increment district number 12. As you know, we're going to be amending the territory of that district to incorporate the Aspirus project. So its financial capacity will improve in the future. So we would be able to look at that tax forgiveness being funded by TID 12.
And so in round numbers, we'd be looking at, with that Fulton Street extension savings, taking on no new city debt to complete this
Correct.
project, utilizing the original borrowing that was intended for mall operations in the first place.
Correct.
Did you figure we had about 950 of the million?
Yeah.
Okay. And the split that we'd be looking for on TID 8, TID 6 for First Ave, we'd be going more to like a 60-40 arrangement versus the 50-50?
Right, and we wouldn't have to formalize that currently. We could, look at that between now and June, because June is the end of the expenditure period for
Sure.
TID 6, next June. So we would evaluate that once we've established the budget for TID 6 and we know exactly what the increment for TID 6 is going to be next year.
Okay. With that, we are running lean on time. Obviously, the council meeting is approaching. I expect, under the circumstances with closed session and potential open session action, we may be looking at a slightly delayed start on the council meeting, given the time. But with that, do we have a motion from the Finance Committee to convene in closed session to deliberate?
Madam Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Dennis.
I would make a motion, we discuss it in open session. There's a number of questions I'd like to ask Mr. Mella, and we're really not, we're maybe spending some money, we don't know yet, but we're really not, there's no competitives, there's only one person bidding on the mall. I don't see why this couldn't be discussed in the sunlight of what's going on here instead of in a back room somewhere.
Well, I think that we can certainly get, we certainly can get the answers that you seek from Mr. Mello. You can go ahead and ask him your questions. But I think as far as our committee deliberations, we never, in any investment deal, deliberate with our partners in the room. And so we need to, as an institution, have that discussion among ourselves, and then we need to, come out, and if we have additional discussion or additional questions, we can certainly get those
I can certainly understand that
answers.
if we had two competing companies out here, but since we only have one, I think we're starting to do too much in the back room and not enough out in the chambers.
Okay, well, we can certainly, if the committees are interested in going to closed session, we can take a vote on closed session, and members can decide whether or not they wish to participate. But if you have specific questions for Mr. Mello, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer them.
Well, here's my problem. We're up against time. We did not have a lot of time. I've got probably 3 pages of questions here. We're never going to have enough time to answer.
Okay.
And I don't know if we should table this and discuss it at some other time, but there's no way I'm going to support this till I get the answers to this question. I may not even support it then. I can't understand why it's so important now to have local ownership. Then we should have evidently have built the mall locally ourselves when we first built it. We didn't seem to have a problem when somebody from out of town built it. We now just have to have a problem with somebody maybe out of town that might own it.
Right.
And that's my concern.
Well, and so that said, if you have some specific questions where we need concrete numbers or we need some indications from the Opportunity Zone group, this would certainly be a time to ask them those questions, though.
I can start, but it's going to take a while.
Well, go ahead, we'll take some questions, and
If
then,
Mr. Mello would come back up. I'm looking at what we were provided. I assume you have a copy of what we were provided?
I'm not sure of everything that you were provided. I know what the term sheet is.
All right,
That's what
well,
we have.
this is evidently the term sheet, I guess. Now, I'll take your word for it that maybe somebody else is looking at buying them all, and maybe they're not good people. But we don't know that for a fact. We can only, but I'll take you as your word on that. All right, and then I'm looking at what is WAS's obligations. First one, WAS will use reasonable efforts to obtain funding to successfully acquire the mall. Okay, reasonable efforts are what? What are reasonable efforts?
Efforts that aren't unreasonable.
Well, to me, that's a weasel word.
Reasonable efforts, we're going to try to do what is commercially reasonable under the circumstances to raise the money. As it stands right now, we outbid 5 other people who bid on the mall project. We went through 3 rounds of bidding for this. In the 3rd round, we exceeded the other 2 bidders that were still in the process of bidding on the mall by a couple $100,000 according to the mall broker. In that case, we had to bid $3 million for the acquisition. We have commitments already for the funds from the foundations to cover 2 million of that $3 million. Plus, if we need additional cash necessary for closing costs and things of that nature, the foundations are doing that as well. So we've already met that obligation that's specified in that term sheet.
All right, it says, as part of the acquisition process, Wausau will work with the seller of the mall and the city to address any past due obligations the city has in result from mall operations. Does that mean you're going to try and collect the money that they owe us now?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's good, because the city doesn't seem to be able to do that.
Well, it sounds to me like that specific item is in there because there's about an anticipated $10,000 amount that's due as additional rent from Rialto because of a percentage rent provision that they have under the ground leases. And there's an audit process that happens every year where they go back and look at how much money they made and what their expenses were, and then you get a percentage of whatever that leftover amount is. Evidently, Rialto complained about this for the past several years because they said that the auditing process cost them $25,000 and the actual amount that they were cutting in a check was like $10,000 or less. So it's our intention, as part of the closing of this transaction, to have Rialto cut a check to you for whatever we anticipate that amount is going to be so that you get the money that was due instead of having to wait to do a $25,000 audit.
I'll check with Mariana. Do they have any past due amounts, or are they current?
They're current on their monthly ground lease payments, the base ground lease payment and their parking payment, but council gave them an extension to pay the extra.
2018 stuff, right?
Right,
Yeah.
the extra ground lease payment, so they have not paid that.
Okay.
In addition to that, to the extent that there are additional funds that are due from them for this year, up to the point in time that our entity acquires title of the property, it's going to be their responsibility to pay that stuff too.
Okay. I'll skip some of my other questions due to our time constraint. It says here in the term sheet, WAS acknowledges that the implementation of an improved development plan may require portions of the mall redevelopment area to be conveyed to municipal organizations or other party to best utilize redevelopment tools available to the city. Who are the other municipal organizations?
Well, that language was put in there specifically in response to some interaction we had with Mary Ann and with Chris Schock related to the fact that pieces of the mall are in TIF districts and pieces of that structure aren't. So for purposes of giving the city as great a flexibility as we possibly could have, so that in the future, if redevelopment is going to happen in those facilities, and that's going to require additional funding potentially from the city, that we wanted to put the city in the best position we could come up with so that they would have the most tools available to them. So like, for example, if we had to convey the property to the Community Development Authority, or a piece of the property to the CDA, so that the value of that property got down to a much lower taxable value for setting your baseline than when you brought that property into the TIF, we're willing to do those types of things. So we're willing to convey the property out and get the property back for purposes of being able to give you flexibility and to give you the ability to realize the limited tools you have available to you for tax increment finance arrangements.
Okay, next. City obligations. We're evidently going to put forth $1 million forgivable loan, basically a grant. Now, it says here, this is retired depending on when certain things happen. Have those benchmarks been developed as to, okay, when you hit this point, you get this, we forgive this, or when you hit this point, we forget this? That's how we normally do it in other developments.
Well, unfortunately, in this case, we don't have a specific plan for what's going to occur with any of these portions of the property yet. But it's our intention that as soon as any piece of this mall where it makes sense to everybody, that property be repurposed for some other reason, that as soon as that happens, that property is going back onto the tax rolls again. So that's the idea of us saying that it's going back into the hands of the private sector, it's being utilized, it's generating revenue for the city from a tax basis, it's doing what we are hoping that it will do in the future. So that's why we have that language.
Okay, now, we realize that Home Furniture owns their property, so they're not involved in this deal whatsoever, correct?
Well, technically, Home Furniture has a ground lease, that the city owns the ground underneath that building. And that's just like everything else on that entire 8-square-block area. The ground is still owned by the city of Wausau. What they have done is they've leased the rights to build stuff on top of it to other people. Home Furniture owns everything from the ground up, so to
That's
speak.
true. But I think it says in here somewhere that when this deal goes through, the city is going to relinquish the ground and air rights.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we won't own those anymore.
That's
What
correct.
about Home? Is Home going to get theirs, or is the city still going to own what's under Home?
No, it's our intention that we would own that property as well. We'd own the ground lease rights
Okay,
underneath
you'd own
Home
the
Furniture.
ground
But
lease
Home Furniture has, it's not our intention to do anything with respect to Home Furniture. They've invested a lot of money in that facility. That sounds like they're very successful. We want them to continue to be successful because it's a good anchor for that location. It's not our intent to change anything over in that spot.
Okay, so you will also be acquiring the Sears property, which the city now owns?
That's our intent, yes.
Okay, and that will be for the cost of $1?
Yes.
Okay, and then eventually you will occupy, or you will own the garage area?
It's, the terms of our term sheet are that the city will continue to own and operate the parking structures. We like the right to acquire those parking structures, and the only reason that we would ever anticipate acquiring the parking structures is if a redevelopment project happened where you had somebody who wanted to own the parking structures. And an example of that would be if somebody acquired the Penny's facility, because it's sitting on top of a parking garage. If somebody bought that and wanted to own the parking structure underneath it, we want to be able to sell that to them as well. So we want the right to be able to buy that from the city and then turn around and deploy it with the new development of those facilities.
But the purchase price would be, as I read it here, would be $1.
Correct. That's for the option for us to get control over the parking structure so that we could utilize that for the new development.
All right, one last thing. As you know, the problem the mall is going through, we discussed, years ago, even before I came to council. In fact, I was at a meeting here, and we were told if we did not borrow money and move Yonkers to the Penny's location, that the downtown would go dark. We would be plagued with skin lesions, and flocks of locusts would descend upon the city. None of that ever happened. The mall is pretty much circling the drain. I agree with that. But it looks like the downtown's doing okay. I don't see any vacant storefronts, and I don't see anybody, not coming downtown because there's nothing downtown. There's a lot downtown. So I guess I'm wondering, without a plan, without telling us exactly what's going to happen to the mall, when it's going to happen, and I just don't understand why you feel that this plan, which doesn't exist yet, will be successful over what we've got going now, which of course is not successful.
What we see right now is an opportunity to get control over the process and come up with a plan that's going to be successful for us, working with the city of Wausau. If we don't do that now, it's not going to happen anytime soon. We're going to be stuck with whatever happens down there. And our general impression, based off of the research we've been able to do so far, is that it's going to be a miserable experience for everybody because the out-of-state owner is going to take the property, they're not going to do anything to it, they're going to slash costs, they're going to be suing the city over their taxes, and then eventually they're just going to leave and we're going to have this giant vacant building there, and it's going to be 5 years or 10 years from now, and you're going to be in a circumstance there, I would say, where you're not going to probably have the foundations available or other organizations that are going to be willing to step up and help out with the process that we have right now. So that's what we have as an opportunity today, is a way to get control over the property, to try to stabilize it, catch our breath, think about what it is we want and really want to see happen with that property, and be in a situation where we don't need to immediately turn around and try to utilize it for something that eventually no one really likes or doesn't actually work. So the idea here, hopefully, is that we're going to have a chance to rebuild something there that we really want and that we want to see and that we're going to be proud of for the next generation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. With that, we'll apologize in advance for what appears to be a delayed start with the City Common Council meeting. This item is of wide public interest, and time is of the issue for us to make a decision, given the time and effort that's been put into the proposal. With that, I'd entertain a motion from Finance to go into closed session if someone would read the language. Go ahead, Mike.
Excuse me. I make a motion that we go into closed session pursuant to sections 19.85, paragraph 1, sub E, for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session regarding the investing of public funds toward the acquisition of the Wausau Center Mall.
Do we have a second to get the item on the floor? Second by Smith. Roll call vote. Smith? Martins?
Aye.
I'll vote aye. We'll then take a motion from ED.
I would welcome a motion to go into closed session from the Economic Development Committee.
I'll read that item.
Thank you.
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, Paragraph 1, Sub E, for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require closed session regarding the investing of public funds toward the acquisition of Wausau Center Mall.
Thank you. Do I have a second to the motion? I have a second from Mr. Gisselman. Roll call vote. Gisselman?
Yes.
Martins?
Aye.
Rasmussen?
Aye.
And I vote aye. We're going into closed. Thank you.
Committees will convene in the Maple Room and return to this chamber for open session activity.